When witches go riding and black cats are seen, the moon laughs and whispers, 'tis near Halloween. If you like to learn, but lack enough time to locate the reason or translate the rhyme, with magical knowledge from ancient tomes on the shelf, I bring Halloween topics to Geek Thyself. Hello everyone, I'm Heather and I'll be your host for this podcast. Halloween is my favorite holiday and my favorite spooky time of the year, so park your broom at the door and listen for a spell as I brew up some Halloween topics for this week and the rest of October. Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to our last episode of the month of Halloween, my favorite holiday. But for this one, we decided to do something that's not necessarily creepy, but that's generally considered very spooky and ominous, which goes in very much in line with the Halloween theme, and that is the
end of the world.
Yeah, the end of the world. It's not a great idea, you know. It's depressing and, well, I guess depressing depending on who you are, but that's a whole different can of worms.
Let's leave that one well enough alone.
But what we're going to talk to you about today is the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. A little bit more information about some of the different interpretations of who they are and what they represent, as well as what they're supposed to be the harbingers of. Although, given their full title, I feel like most people kind of know that already.
Yep. But we're now going to talk about them a little bit, because they're a little confusing and
yes,
very interesting.
Yes, and to be clear, also for anyone who goes Googling or searching for the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, there are a lot of different groups of men over the years who have been referred to as the Four Horsemen as like a nickname. So you do want to make sure that if you're looking for it for the historical, like Armageddon, Apocalypse, Christianity version, you're going to have to actually like make sure you're looking at the right one and not just random people that got that as a nickname. But according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse in Christianity are the four horsemen who, according to the Book of Revelation, appear with the opening of the seven seals that bring forth the cataclysm of the apocalypse. So, as we mentioned, they're basically the harbingers of the apocalypse.
Yep, end of the world, end of everything, and all having special roles in bringing that about, essentially.
Yes, and in some variations, depending on who's interpreting and what people think, in addition to it being the apocalypse, they sometimes also represent the second coming of Christ and, you know, that kind of thing. So a lot of it also depends on your particular version of Christianity, and there's so many out there that it's, you know, there's going to be a slightly different variation depending on who you're talking to. Sorry, I just want to preface for anyone who's listened to previous episodes and is like, wait a minute, why is this person who's told us she's Buddhist talking about a Christianity thing? It's because I think it's interesting, and it's sort of history related, which I also think is interesting.
Interesting. I actually didn't know you were Buddhist. That's very interesting. I had never asked, but yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, well, and no, it's totally fine. And it had never come up, I don't think, in conversations with just you and me. And, yeah, and my dad is an atheist, my mom's Buddhist, and my dad is a huge history buff. So despite the fact that he's atheist, I watched a lot of the History Channel, which has a lot of specials on the history of this Bible thing, the history of that Bible thing, and Christianity and different religions. So yeah, when I used to joke when I was a kid that, and no offense to anyone out there, but that I knew more about the history, like the real life history surrounding the Bible, than some of my friends who were Christian.
I've heard you say that before.
Yeah.
On the show. Well, I can't remember why you said it.
I don't know.
We were talking about museums
Oh.
And I can't remember specifically, but it was a little bit ago. Anyway, we're back on tangents again.
Yeah.
So let's try and
we excel at
steer
those.
the ship back. Yeah, we do. Okay, so the Four Horsemen, in general, are described as riding 4 individual horses that all have their own looks to them, with the first being white, the second being red, the third being black, and the fourth being pale, almost blue in the illustration that I'm looking at anyway.
Yep.
White is perhaps one of the most confusing ones, and that is why Heather's going to talk about it, because she likes the confusing bit.
I mean, you're not wrong. So, in general, the Four Horsemen in and of themselves are also somewhat confusing, because before the Reformation, it was widely held by some of the premier scholars who had studied the Bible that the 4 horses being ridden during the apocalypse were all being ridden by the same rider. So the rider went from the white horse to the red horse to the black horse to the pale horse. And it wasn't until later interpretations that we ended up with the 4 separate riders. The first horse, the white horse, is, like Russ said, the most confusing because there's the most difference in what people foresee it as. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it's the same over there in the UK. I know over here in the US, when people talk about the 4 horsemen, they almost always say, oh yeah, the 4 horsemen, there's war, famine, pestilence, and death.
I wouldn't be able to tell you, just because, I'm going to be honest, I've never heard someone talk about the 4 horsemen in casual conversation.
I mean, that's
which
fair.
I think is a shame. because maybe we should talk more about the 4 horsemen.
Maybe.
So I couldn't tell you how they're ordered.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I mean, the specific order, other than what we see here,
anytime I've ever
known,
heard about them, yes, those are the 4 that I've heard about.
Okay. And it's the same for me, and I know, up until researching for this episode, and I know that in a lot of movies and TV shows and things, when they're talking about the 4 horsemen, it is always those 4. It's always pestilence, war, famine, and death. Those are the 4 that get talked about. But if you actually look at the history of the 4 horsemen and the apocalypse, they aren't all referred to that way, which is interesting. The white horse is the most confusing one, though, because it a very big difference. In colloquialisms and nowadays, it does often get referred to in movies and TV shows and things as being sort of pestilence, but it's more actually commonly referred to, especially with people who study the Bible, as things like conquest. Or in some versions, it's even seen as like an antichrist or sometimes Christ himself, depending on the exact interpretation. And actually, just, to do my due diligence, I checked on some Christian sites as well for information. And there is one called Christianity.com, which I assume, not being someone who researches Christianity heavily on the regular, is at least somewhat accurate. Sorry for any Christians out there. If you know otherwise, I apologize, but I don't know. So I'm using what I can find. On Christianity.com, they actually refer to the first horse, a white one, as one that seems bent on conquest. The rider has a crown and holds a bow, and it's often, it has been attributed to the rider being sometimes Jesus, sometimes the Antichrist, and things like that. But the white horse is often referred to by people who study the Bible as conquest as opposed to pestilence, which I think is interesting because in all the media and things that I've ever seen, it's pestilence. And it sounds like it's the same for you.
Yes. Like I said, it's not something I'm super familiar with, but yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, first one, very up to interpretation of the many, many different interpretations that there are.
Yes.
Does the first horseman carry something specific?
He carries a bow, is what's referred to. So, let me go back to that page. Okay.
Which kind of makes sense if it was like conquest. or something like that, because a bow isn't something you really associate with disease, pestilence.
Exactly. No, that's very true. It makes more sense for conquest. But yeah, the description of the first horseman, the white horseman, is, I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. So that is an excerpt from the prophecy that's supposed to describe the coming of these four horsemen, who will, during a certain time frame, which deals with the apocalypse, be allowed to kill a quarter of the population of the earth. And the prophecy basically says that they will, I mean, this is paraphrasing, but basically says that they will kill a quarter of the earth's population with a combination of wars, famine, and disease. So there are some who suspect, some scholars and people who suspect that that might be part of the reason why the white horse started to become associated with disease and pestilence and plagues, because
of that line. Yeah.
Of that particular line. And the other thing is, too, and this only just occurred to me, but if you look through history, one of the things that, and I can think of a couple of examples right off the top of my head, one of the things that has allowed conquerors in our histories to take over other countries easily is that some of the diseases they brought with them were diseases that the native people did not have resistances to.
That's true. Didn't think about that.
So that just
like
occurred
the Black
to me.
Death, the Spanish flu. Yeah, that's real true.
Well, or
didn't even think about it.
You know, it's very topical here in America because we just had Indigenous Peoples Day. Yes, I say Indigenous Peoples Day and not Columbus Day. But when Christopher Columbus came over here, it's known that he brought diseases with him that killed a lot of the native peoples that they ran into. And
I didn't know that.
There are some historians who do think that part of the reason that the conquistadors had such an easy time wiping out the Aztecs and the other native kingdoms that existed here when they came over to Mexico was largely because Cortez and his men brought diseases with them that the people had no resistances to. And so it wiped out large chunks of the population. Now, you would think that it would have gone the other way too and also affected the conquistadors, but, you know, depending on the kind of diseases the native peoples had, maybe not.
Maybe there was already like some immunization. I can't say that word.
Immunization.
There you go. Thank you. Like going one way but not the other. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. The rest of them are not going to be quite as long because, like I said, the white horse is just a little bit ambiguous. So the red horse very much has always been associated with war. Oh boy. Okay. The red horseman carries a great sword. It's not spelt like great sword as in like a great sword, like a two-handed sword, but the depiction of it is a fairly long sword, so it could be a great sword. True. So yeah, and, often represented as war and holding a sword ready for battle, or sometimes represented as mass slaughter, which, not to split hairs, but they're kind of the same thing sometimes.
I mean, yeah. Or, no, that's very true. Yeah. Especially depending on the kind of war. Like, civil wars are incredibly bloody quite often because
there's very few wars throughout history that have been non-violent. The Cold War being a good example of one, but there are very few. So, yeah.
This is very true.
And red is seen as an aggressive and fiery colour, as well as a declaration of war. Military symbol. Yep. So there's a lot of militaristic and combat aspects put together within the second horseman. And again, it also just says here the second horseman may represent civil war as opposed to the war of conquest that the first horseman is sometimes said to bring. Like we said, the first horseman is just really confusing.
Yeah, there's a lot of different interpretations.
According to Edward Bishop's Eliot's interpretation of the Four Horsemen, a symbolic prophecy in the history of the Roman Empire, the second seal is opened, and the Roman nation that experienced joy, prosperity, triumph is made subject to the red horse, which depicts war and bloodshed, civil war. Yep. Again, so it's always within the sort of vein of war, combat, or death, but in very much a combat way, which... So, yeah, that's kind of everything. And something I'm a little unsure about. Do they kill a quarter each, or is it a quarter between all of them?
A quarter between all of them.
Okay, because part of me would assume that it might have been a quarter each, because if it's the apocalypse, you'd assume everyone would be taken. That's all.
Yeah, as far as I could tell from everything I was reading, it looks like it's supposed to be just a quarter of the population. And of course, the Four Horsemen represent the first 4 seals of the 7 seals that have to open. The Lamb of God opens the first 4 of the 7 seals, and that summons out these 4 beings who then bring in the apocalypse. And for anyone who doesn't follow Christianity or doesn't know different interpretations, Lamb of God is a title that's often used to refer to Jesus Christ.
Yep. And they basically are the heralds of the divine apocalypse or last judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those are the first 2, and we're already at the time for the break, which is ridiculous. Alright, so we're going to be going to our break and doing some fun times, and then coming back to death and famine. Oh boy.
Okay, everyone, welcome to this week's mid-roll, which is going to be a lot happier than the subject of today's episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no apocalypse in the mid-roll.
No.
Oh, no, we let it in. No. Stop.
Why did you open the seal?
I didn't. It wasn't me.
Okay, so, like always this week, we want to talk about our wonderful sponsors, starting off with World Anvil. World Anvil's an amazing site where you can do different world building and campaign management for your campaign or story or book, anything you're writing. It has the most robust world creation and campaign management software out there, and they even won an Emmy award for it. So we definitely recommend you check them out. They're also amazingly nice people, and they're constantly coming out with updates and new things you can do with it. We can't talk about it enough how much we love them. It's worldanvil.com, and I definitely recommend you go check it out.
Yep. And someone else you should check out, because we love them as well, is Die Hard Dice at Castle Die Hard. They create amazing dice, as in their name. They focus mainly on producing a gorgeous metal dice, as was in the creepypasta mid-roll last week. Heather was showing me dice during the mid-roll, and I just started drooling over them, because they're absolutely gorgeous. You can always find what you're looking for, especially with their dual colour series, Spellbinders. They've got so many different options that whatever colours sort of fit your character, you can find what you want. They've got the amazing accessories like the scroll of rolling, which we talk about always because it's so amazing. They've got their own polymer dice which they've been working on as well. I can't wait to see what else they come out with that. They've got the frosted series dice which they've kept around, which I love.
Yeah, they have glow-in-the-dark ones now too.
Yeah, they do. They're doing everything to create amazing dice for you and for us. And boy, are their dice pretty. And they make great noise. And I'm pretty sure I just heard Heather pick up her dice for more clicky-clacky math runs.
I may have been playing with them.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to head over there to dieharddice.com, you can find amazing dice. And if you do find anything you want to purchase, you can use the code Geek Thyself to get 15%. That's 15 off your first or next order with them. So yeah, if you want to roll with the best, just go to dieharddice.com.
Yes, and last but not least, we want to talk about a new show that's coming to the Nerdsmith Network. Set to launch tonight is a new live stream on our Twitch at Nerdsmith. It's twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith. And you can go check out our newest show, Obscurum. Which I'm very excited for.
Yeah. It is a City of Mists RPG. And it's set in an alternate universe in the 1950s.
Yes.
Do you have any more details on this, or do we not?
Well, it hasn't started yet, so it starts tonight. So in terms of storyline, I don't have anything I can drop as a hint. I will say that I'm very excited because the people who are a part of the show, including Rev from the Crit Show, which was recently on the Nerdsmith Network, and Nix, who's actually also works with the Crit Show, as well as Heath, the DM, Dire Bear DM, they're all amazing. So I'm very excited to see what's happening. And some of the aesthetic things that I've seen in the background, a lot of very noir feel to them, which has me excited.
Yeah, I kind of got that from the 50s. I was hoping that's kind of where it was going with it, because I love the whole noir from the 50s and 60s. Okay, and as it says, that starts today, the 30th, Wednesday, yes. 4 p.m. PST, on Twitch. You can watch it live, be part of the action. We'll be there.
Yes.
Oh, I will try to be there, depending on work, but I will be watching regardless.
Yes, you should definitely go check it out.
Yeah.
And again, that's twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith.
And you can also find all the rest of the amazing live streams that are on there from us, including
Discover RPG.
Oh wow! I think DRPG. Well, I was right. DRPG, but it's Discover RPG.
Yeah.
We have the Dead Men Tell No Tales on Fridays with Ghosts of Saltmarsh. We also have Shadowed Forge on Fridays with Janet from World Anvil, like we just talked about. We've got Shenanigans
on Tuesdays.
Or whatever Shenanigans is right now, because it's not quite Shenanigans. Or is it Shenanigans again? I don't know. But it's still good.
It's Shenanigans when we have all of our players, and when we don't have all our players due to work or emergencies, then we play an alternate game the same night. Same people, just a different game.
Yes, and still wonderful people. So yes, go and check out all the wonderful things that we have over there. I'm sure you'll find something that you like. Okay, and with all that happy that we've put into this, now we're going to go back into talking about the apocalypse.
Yep.
Okay. Hiya guys, this is Russ with another small announcement at this week's mid-roll. From the 1st of November, we'll be starting our 2019 Nerds Giving event. That's from the 1st of November to the 15th. All the money that we'll be raising this time is going to HIFA International. HIFA International is a charity organisation working to end hunger and poverty around the world by providing livestock and training for struggling communities. They are an absolutely wonderful charity. We'll be doing a load of one-shots for the event, along with them all being animal-themed, and you can watch those on twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith. You can also go to nerdsmith.org to learn more about how to donate. Any money that you can spare will be greatly appreciated. There's no pressure to donate. You can just come along and enjoy. We'll also be giving away prizes to people who donate during each day. All this starts in a couple of days. Please come and check it out, even if you can't support. Just being there and sharing the word on all social media, wherever you can, that would mean so much to all of us here. Alright, thanks guys.
Welcome back, everybody, to the less, well, it's still exciting, but it's less positive, I guess.
Yeah.
Part of today's episode. So now we're going to be talking about the final two horsemen, and the next one up is the Black Horse, also known as Famine. And Famine is one of the ones that the Black Horse is one of the ones that's almost always depicted as famine. There's really only one other big interpretation of it, which is imperial oppression. But even then, the idea behind the imperial oppression often has to do with the idea that the people in power are controlling all of the resources and goods.
Like restricting foods.
Right. And things like that. So more that the balance of this, the scales are tipped. There's no balance between the powerful and the powerless kind of situation. Yeah.
Speaking of scales, isn't that what the Black Horseman carries?
Yes, the Black Horseman. Yeah. We should probably just read through all of the little revelation tidbits at the end just so they can hear them. But The Black Horseman comes in carrying a pair of scales in his hand. And so part of it is the weighing of things on the scales. And a lot of times the balance of the scale could be tipped in one direction or another, depending on the interpretation. And also whether or not people interpret it as the oppression. Because obviously with the imperial oppression, there's going to be one side that's much higher than the other. Whereas if it's just famine, sometimes it's more level, because lack of food can equalize people across the board. Because suddenly the farmer becomes the most important man in the country if you have food issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so he's almost always that. And there are some interpretations of the Black Horseman as being sort of like a lawgiver, like the scales of justice, which again could somewhat go back to the whole idea of like famine and lack of food levels the playing field, because I mean it does at a certain point. You know, all the money in the world doesn't matter if everyone's starving and they don't want to sell you their food.
Absolutely. Just as a small extra tidbit before we move on, the Black Horseman is the only one of the riders that is accompanied by vocal speaking in the story, who goes on about talking about the prices of food, wheat, and barley, and saying that and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. He speaks to John, apparently. In the biblical translation, but that was an interesting point, that they're the one that speaks. I think that moves us on very nicely to the Pale Horse, which, as we haven't covered them yet, it's fairly obvious that this one is Death.
Yes.
Death. Death is interesting for a couple of ways, in that they come through without any specific item, although Death is always is quite often pictured with a scythe. In the actual story, they aren't given anything specifically. They are followed by Hades. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword and famine and the pestilence and the wild beasts of the earth, which of course is where conquest comes from. So that's how all four of them. That's how all four of them are summoned, like I said, with the lamp breaking the seals. I'm not sure what Hades does specifically yet. However, illustrations commonly depict him carrying a scythe, like the Grim Reaper. And then Hades, I know, is depicted as the Lord of the Underworld, not specifically Hell.
Correct. Well, and so this goes back to the Greek mythology that I love so much, but a lot of the earliest sort of depictions of the prophecy or interpretations of this prophecy that deal with the idea of the apocalypse are partly tied into Roman and therefore Greek origins. And one of the things that comes up is that and it's interesting, Death is the only one who's actually named. All of the other horsemen are not specifically named. Death is named as his name is Death. And he's also sometimes referred to as Thanatos, depending on the text. Thanatos is the Greek god of death. Hades was the Greek god of the underworld. And the underworld included both the Greek version of heaven and the Greek version of hell. So basically, after you died, Hades was in charge of everything. But when you died, Thanatos was the guy. Like it says, I've just read in the bit that we're reading, Hades, who followed him, was the resting place of the dead, like you just said. But so that's why they follow. But like and there are a lot of depictions of Death just being a skeleton, for the most part. Again, like the Grim Reaper.
but that's not explicitly said in the passages. But I can understand why people perceive them that way.
Agreed. I mean, the other thing that's interesting too is that that I think is interesting is that in some of the earliest texts, again, that are written in Greek or Roman, Death's horse, the color of Death's horse is written, I'm not going to be able to say this, I think it's chloros, which is, in original Greek, can mean either like a green or greenish yellow or pale and pallid. So that's why there's some interpretations of the of Death's horse that have the horse be like this pale, almost sickly, ghosty type of yellow-green color, which I think is kind of cool. There is the thing I mentioned earlier, where until the Reformation and some different imagery that was produced that showed 4 separate horsemen, there was a lot of scholars out there who believed that there was just one horseman who rode those 4 horses all in a row. And in some cases, they felt that the horseman riding them was going to be Christ himself, since he's the one who's supposed to open these seals. So,
yeah, something about that just seems a little confusing to me, because, like, if he opens the first seal and then comes out of it?
Well, so...
Or is it just the horses that come out of the seals?
The horses.
Right.
Okay, the idea was that the horses come out of the seal, with that interpretation, is that the horses come out of the seal, and then he rides each of them one after the other.
That makes sense. Okay.
Like, he rides the horse out and then does what that horse is going to do with him, the death or famine or whatever, and then goes back and gets the next horse and does it again, kind of idea.
Okay, so, yeah, it's... and I assume the apocalypse with like getting rid of the 4th and then bringing down Last Judgment. I suppose we could talk briefly about Last Judgment as it leads into that. Okay, so Last Judgment. Let's pull up that. Judgment Day, Second Coming of Christ, final and eternal judgment of God, the people of every nation. So essentially, it's the rapture, which is where all of the good, honest people, specifically Christians, in obviously this text, are saved from a world that has been ravaged by the apocalypse. And then the people who aren't being taken are left with what has been done to the earth, essentially.
Yep. Yeah. That about sums it up.
Yeah, there's not really too much else to say without going super duper deep into the Christian lore, which I don't think we have time to do.
Not if we want to keep this episode reasonably lengthened. So,
yeah, that's fair. So, yeah.
So I think an interesting way to close off, if you're okay with it, would probably be to read through the actual verses of Revelation. At least the ones the ones we found. There might be slightly different wording depending on your version of the Bible.
Yes.
But these are the descriptions. So for the white horse. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying as with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Revelation 6, 1-2.
Okay, so Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Okay, and for the red horse, when he broke the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come," and another, a red horse, went out. And to him who sat on it, it was granted to take a piece from the earth, and the man would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. And that's Revelation 6, 3-4.
And then we have the black horse. When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard something like a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not damage the oil and the wine." Revelation 6, verses 5 and 6.
And finally, when the lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and with the wild beasts of the earth. Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8.
Yep. And especially hearing the wording of those descriptions, it's not overly surprising that the human imagination took hold and has created the imagery we now have today.
Yep. Okay, so on that sort of note, I think that... Because I was going to ask... which is your favourite? But that seems like a weird question.
I actually have one.
Yes, I thought you would, which is why I still asked.
So, of the Four Horsemen, the one I prefer, but it's not because of the Christian description of him necessarily, is Death.
Okay, that's interesting, because Death was also the one I would pick too.
So I like him for a couple of reasons. I mean, no matter how you look at it, death comes for everyone. So it's a very level playing field. There's no conqueror and conquered. And, once you're dead, you don't have to deal with all the chaos of whatever's going on. So that's a nice plus. The other reason is because, as I talked about in a previous episode, I think before you joined me, I'm a huge Terry Pratchett fan. And so I have read a lot of the portrayal of death that's in the Terry Pratchett novels. So even though I know that logically this anthropomorphized version of death, the skeleton on the white horse and everything, probably does not exist in any reality. Well, maybe in some reality, but not in ours. But the mental image of, death coming in on a pale horse and calling it Binky, which is what happens in Terry Pratchett's novels. I can't help it. I like death.
Fair enough. I just think Death is probably the most interesting out of the bunch, being obviously the named one. And
also
being
true.
Just, I don't know, death doesn't necessarily have to be painful. Dying, you'd hope when we all have to do it, won't be painful. Like famine, starving, war, bloodshed, pestilence, disease, all of those are uncomfortable and could be slow and very painful. Whereas I feel like death is probably the most merciful of them. Yes, he's taking their life, but
right,
it's fast, it's quick, and seems painless. So that's why, out of those ones, I think I would... If I had to go out one of the ways, it would be that one, I guess.
That's fair.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was a bit of a weird one, but still very interesting. If we missed anything, like I said, there are so many different interpretations, we probably did. Feel free to let us know and we'll discuss it. Neither of us identify with being Christian specifically.
Nope.
But we're very happy to talk about anything. At least I am, and Heather seems to be.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be back next week with a not spooky topic, but certainly an interesting topic, because our plot is afoot. And we'll see you next week for that. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Geek Thyself. Don't forget to check out all the other amazing content on the Nerdsmith Network. If you have any questions for either of us, you can get in contact with us on Twitter at geek_thyself.
You can also email us at geekthyself@nerdsmith.org. And please don't forget to go to iTunes and leave us a review, or also go anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
We'll be back next week with another informative and fun episode.
And until then, don't forget to geek thyself.